NC Jack Kowalski, etc. et al. Versus Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital. Starting with the plaintiffs, let's take appearances, please.
Samantha Lawrence on behalf of the plaintiffs with Nick Whitney and Greg Anderson.
Howard Hunter on behalf of All Children's Hospital with Ethan Shapiro, Pat Crowell, David Hughes, and Chris Altenburn. Our corporate representative today is Dr. Richard Elliott.
Thank you. Can I see the attorneys up here, please? Let's recap on a couple of issues. First, we have circulated the draft language. Now, again, Mr. Altenburn, it's not a final. Feel free to, and you and Mr. Elliott, chew it up, chop it up.
Yeah, I'm here mostly to receive this today, and I will go back to my computer and work with Mr. Elliott on this and see what I can do with this. It looks close to me. Frankly, I put in the language of the orders wishing I could do what you did, and I'm happy that you've done that. I think that it will make it easier for the jury, and I hope that Mr. Elliott and I can work on this, maybe have something back to you even by the end of lunch hour or so for you.
Only two things, Judge. I wanted to mostly talk to counsel about it, but I didn't get a chance to get to Mr. Elliott this morning about it, but a time period for not just the date of the order, but the time period when there was contact for someone and not contact from somebody else. One suggestion. The other one is how to deal with the ketamine order, which at some point I think needs to be addressed in there. But I'll leave that up to the appellate counsel and the court.
For when she was leaving the court, you mean? When she was leaving court custody? Or
just the fact of the order itself. I'm not sure exactly how to deal with it, but I think it should be dealt with.
We were trying to just do visitation kinds of issues with this. And not
I understand.
The only other suggestion I have, Your Honor, is that you said this is going to go back with the jury at the end as well as reading it to them. I frankly think it's complicated enough. It might be a good idea to give them a copy when you read it to them in the court, whether it's later today or tomorrow morning. But
Talk with that concept with Mr. Elliott. I would feel much more comfortable if both sides agreed.
Sure.
And the concept, I think, is missing, and we need to also work in, and I put some brackets there, is that the parental rights were not removed.
I understand. I'll see what I can do on that.
Okay. Thank you very much on that. Now, the next issue with respect to Dr. Malik, I have gone ahead and made the rulings. That was just, or should be, emailed in the last few minutes.
I saw that, Judge. I don't see that you ruled on our objection. There was you should have had one objection from us. And I saw the court had a question on one of them, and I'll have to look at the deposition to answer the court's question.
Goodness, I guess I did not see yours, so.
It's just one section. I don't have it in front of me. We'll find it, and send it to the court with that?
Yeah, I'm just seeing where I put the deposition.
Do you have the reference?
Oh, here it is. I found it. There was a timing issue on
I see that,
at page
Judge.
89. I couldn't figure out from the context when we were talking about, and that might impact the court's.
I see that. I can't answer without looking at the deposition and,
Yeah, I've got the deposition in front of me. Do you have the page in line for the
the objection.
defendant's objection? I'll just do it right now.
Can you find it?
If you don't have it, then, well, let me move on to something else, and then I'll come back to
find
that
it.
if you find it. There was, on Friday, a discussion of a number of exhibits that presumably come from Beata Kowalski, and I'm pretty confident that these do come from Beata Kowalski. I know that there was a couple that journaled at a time when Maya and Dad were in Mexico and Mom was in the United States, but the language continues to be consistent, and so I'm confident these are Beata's statements. Now, I know we've had some discussions about the various admissibilities of the diagnosis of Munchausen by proxy. How I read these emails to herself, from Beata to herself, is it's a journal, essentially. It's a contemporaneous view of what was going on, and I liken this to a video in the sense that we saw videos of what was happening with Maya at various different times between 2015 and her admission to Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital. And so in reviewing these emails, I keep coming back to the generalized concept that it's important for the jury to see and understand the context of how Maya presented to Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital. That would include how she was doing, for the good or for the bad, because some of these, she was having great days, and other days, not so good days. And so I liken these series of emails, these journal emails, as contemporaneous statements by Beata Kowalski, who obviously at this point is a party admission. And so I am going to let them in. Let me just go ahead and physically do that, and then I'll give you some future thoughts about the Munchausen issue. The court at this time is going to receive into evidence 3144. I think it's only one page. Court will receive 3145. I believe that's only one page. 3146. I believe that's only one page. 3147. I believe that one's one page. 3148. I believe that's 2 pages.
Correct.
3150, 1 page. 3151, 1 page. 3152, 1 page. 3155, 1 page. 3156, 1 page. 3157, 1 page. 3158, 1 page. 3159, 1 page. 3160, 1 page. 3161, 1 page. 3162, 1 page. 3164, 1 page. 3165, 1 page. 3166, 1 page. 3167, 1 page. 3170, 1 page. 3171, 1 page. 3173, 1 page. 3174, 1 page. 3175, 1 page. 3177, 1 page.
I have 3177, I have 2 pages listed.
I was only provided 1 page.
Okay.
3177.
And Your Honor, 3175, I'm not sure what it is right now, but it's not on their list, at least as of today, so
Well, it might have been,
not sure what's going on with that one.
Well, I can show you what specifically it is here. So right now, only page 1 of 3177, if that is more than 1 page, is in. Okay, 3175, and so only page 1 of 3177. Madam Clerk, was there more than 1 page on the sheet? Okay. If someone can at some point show that to me. 3178, I only have 2 pages for that one.
that's corrected.
Madam Clerk, would it help if you saw these? They have a little number at the bottom, or are you good?
Sure.
Okay. I'll want them back after you're finished with them. Let's see here. I think I just got an email on. This is something else. This is a reconsideration motion on counts 21A and B, which is the intentional infliction. But have we going back to Dr. Malik's deposition, do we have the defendant's
Yes.
objection?
Just tell right down.
Judge, the Malik objection was page 21, line 22, to page 22, line 24.
21, line
22,
22 through 22, line what?
24, chapter 39 was the objection.
I'm going to sustain and exclude 21 lines 22 through page 22, lines 24.
And we're looking at the judge, you can answer your time for question on the other one. There are some more exhibits, if we can address them, unless the court had something else.
I have now finished my homework from last night.
Okay. You get an A. All right, so, Judge, We have some EEG video segments that we would like to admit. We can play them for your honor, but they're from that 48-hour EEG.
How long are they?
They're all, there's 4, and they're all, 30 seconds or less?
Has the plaintiff seen them?
I don't know.
I have not. Nick, have you seen it?
No.
Roll tape?
Okay, so we need 3085. And we'll label these 1, 2, 3, and 4, Judge.
I don't know,
This
how are
is-
you designating them? How are they designated on the,
Well, they weren't, we're designating them as 3084, 1, 2, 3, and 4.
how do you want them designated? Is that fine or? The clerk says that's fine.
Okay, all right, this is the first one, Judge.
What's this one?
3085 1.
And you said 3184?
3084.
3085.
I'm sorry. Can we start over? 3085.
3085.
If there's the video.
Did you play it? Wait, it didn't play. I didn't see it.
Okay.
It's not playing.
No, that's the actual video.
I don't know. I don't know what the issue is. We'll fix it. We'll go into the second one, Judge. 30852. That'd be it.
Any objection?
No objection.
The court will receive 3085-2.
Okay. 30853, please.
My only comment, Your Honor, is I think there's sound with these videos, so
Oh.
Well, let's play the sound then.
obviously the sound there is not important, but I'm curious to know what the sound is with the nurse and my interacting.
Okay, well, any objection to 3085? That was 3.
No, Your Honor.
Court receives 3085-3. Let's go back and play 2 with the sound.
Suggest it's indecipherable, but
Agreed, but still I could
So
play.
2
Sure,
two
that's
is
fine.
in. What's number 4?
Objection.
Okay, court receives 3085-4.
Do you have to do something to one to fix it?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll skip that for now, is what you're saying? It's not for the witnesses until this afternoon, Judge, we may have to revisit one.
No, not yet.
Oh, you think you fixed it?
Oh, you fixed it?
No.
Not yet.
Oh, okay.
And then, hold on, let me find it. 33041, can you bring that up? Probably hard to fix and put up exhibits at the same time.
33 what?
04, it's on the last page. It's just a still photo of the EEG room.
Three 3304.
Should be on page 6 of your list.
I've got so many lists on.
Yeah.
Main objective is ours.
I have a list that has page 8,
Oh.
and it's 3240, and then the next one's 3315. So
I don't know what to tell you, Your Honor. I have one that has 6 pages, but this is 3304-1. It's quite simply a picture of the EEG room that's been referenced many times.
We object, it's not fair and accurate representation of the EEG room at the time. That clearly is not the setup at the time of Maya Kowalski's admission. He wasn't in a, I don't know if that's a toddler bed or what that is, but that was not the bed Maya Kowalski was in. That apparatus is unfamiliar.
And all the windows are open.
Well, Judge, it is not the bed she was in, that is accurate, but it is the room that's been referenced many times.
well, I don't know. It does seem different than what we were just looking at. Who's gonna say that this is a fair and accurate depiction of the room as it existed at the time Maya was there?
Dr. Dees is testifying this afternoon.
Can we put up a couple of those previous videos?
Sure. 38085. You can see it's the same couch. The
Every room
window,
has that couch.
sunlight is coming in through the window.
Can we focus on the commode and the bed, which are clearly different?
Where-
And if the position is it's the same, then it's cumulative.
Much has been made about the almost to liken it to a dungeon that we put this girl in. It's a still photo. It's from when we went through the hospital with counsel, and everybody's taking photos. So it's not, they've never seen it before. They saw the room that day, and they have their own photos. The only difference is the bed.
Can I see the still photo again, please?
That was 3304.
Do you have one that doesn't have that in it?
I don't think we do, Judge, because it was how it was set up when we did the walkthrough of the hospital with opposing counsel.
Well,
I'll say it further.
here's the thing. Assuming that there's going to be testimony that this is a fair and accurate depiction, then I will probably let it in. I'm not going to let it in at this point in time.
Understood.
It does look different, so I'm going to require the testimony first. It does show an angle that we haven't seen, so I don't think it would be cumulative.
All right, understood, Judge.
So just remember, when we do that, that we'll have to not show it to the jury. If you have a printout of it, it might just be easier, so I don't have to
We can do
change.
that. We can print that out. Not print this up. We don't need it right now. Judge, to answer your inquiry about Dr. Malik's deposition.
Yes.
He is testifying regarding his note of 10/9/16.
So before the shelter. Let me go back. Look at it now.
Do you have the?
I've got it up right now.
Okay. Do you need the page reference, Judge?
I've got it starting on page 89, line 15.
Yes.
So this was after the first call, but before the second call. Am I correct in my time frame? Or is this after the second call, but prior to the decision to shelter?
It's unclear.
We're not seeing whatever anybody else is seeing.
No, I'm just looking at it, the actual deposition.
It's explaining developments throughout the course of that day tonight. Where Dr. Malik worked the essentially the morning and afternoon shift. That helps the court.
I think I'm going to sustain this one. I
Okay.
think it references too much about making reports to the hotline.
All right, so just to be clear, Judge, that's 89:15 to 90:12.
Correct. Court will sustain that designation.
All right, Judge, I understand it's 9 o'clock, and our first witness is by Zoom.
And no one's here by Zoom yet.
That's not good.
Did someone ask Ms. Syback to send the link to?
Yes, sir. We confirmed they
How's
have.
it going to be?
Who is it?
Who is it?
It's Dr. Santana Rojas.
Who's in Orlando.
Maybe someone can
Call her.
make a telephone call?
Use the link. Also, if I could advise the court, I inadvertently left off like 4 photos that are going to be needed with the
Judge is
second
saying no
witness.
one's in the waiting room.
Well,
Oh,
Sorry.
are you using the link that we sent? They're saying they can hear and see us, and they're using the link, the webinar link that the court sent.
well, I suspect what they are is in as a observer. What's the name again?
Santana Rojas, or Goodis. It's by, her counsel is Jeff Goodis, Your Honor. It's probably under his name.
Right. They came in not as a participant under the Zoom language, but as just a normal attendee. So Jeff Goodis. Hold on a second. Let me see if I can do something. It's not giving me the option to promote. Oh, there it goes. Promote to panelist.
He's telling me, Judge, you just used the link he was sent.
Let's see if this works. And so is the attorney on a different?
Oh, there
There
we
you
go.
are. There you go.
Give me the correct spelling of the witness's name.
Dr. Legezia, I'm hanging up, Joe.
L-I-S.
I'm sorry.
G.
Say it again.
L-I-S-G-E-L-I-A.
Last name.
L for Santana, S-A-N-T-A-N-A. That's R-O-J-A-S.
Did I get the spelling correct?
No, it's an A at the end.
A at the end of what?
Or the first thing.
L-I-A?
L-I-S-G-E-L-I-A. That's correct now.
Sorry about that. There we go.
Your Honor, I intend to be off camera through the testimony. I assume everybody would prefer that.
I can't have that one being moved. Yeah. Because that one can't move because it interferes. We've got issues with where the court TV needs it and where the lawyers need it. Well, now it's probably too far. Let's bring it back this way. Make sure the cord is not, it usually gets under the cord gets caught up. So use this one to flip it. Are we ready to bring in the jury?
Yes, sir, Your Honor.
And are you currently in the state of Florida, ma'am?
Yes, sir.
Let me go ahead and put you under oath. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you give is the truth?
Yes, I swear.
Thank you. And then is the attorney, because right now you're somewhat in the picture, so
I'll get out of the picture, Your Honor.
thank you. Let's bring in the jury. And is someone going to place the video up onto the TV? I'm sorry? Just waiting on the link.
All rise. Jurors entering.
Hey, please be seated. Good morning. Good morning. Members of the jury, I want to confirm while you were away, you did not discuss this case amongst yourselves. You did not investigate this case, and you did not receive any information. Is that correct? Correct. And you have not received any contact about this case. Is that correct? Correct. And you have not seen any media reports of this case. Is that correct? Correct. Our next witness is, again, by Zoom. She has already been placed under oath outside of your presence, so she will be testifying under oath. And I think we're going to put it on the screen here for you in just a moment. There we go. And Mr. Hunter, can you please call your next witness?
Our next witness is Dr. Lesgelia Santana Rojas.
You may proceed.
Thank you, sir. Good morning.
Morning.
Would you tell the jury your name, please, ma'am?
Yes, my name is Lesgelia Santana Rojas.
And where are you speaking to us from, Dr. Santana Rojas?
I'm in Tampa, Florida.
Okay. And I said you were a doctor. Could you tell us what your occupation is and where you work?
Yes, I work at Nemours Children's Health in Orlando, Florida. I'm a pediatric anesthesiologist and also a pediatric pain manager doctor.
Okay. Could you tell the jury where you received your undergraduate and medical training?
Yes, my undergraduate medical training were at the University of Puerto Rico School of Medicine.
And when did you get your degree there?
When?
Yes, ma'am.
Which one? 2000 was undergraduate and medical school 2004.
Okay. And then after 2004, where did you go from there?
I did a residency program at the same location, University of Puerto Rico School of Medicine in anesthesia.
All right. And then you finished that at 1 year?
2004.
Okay. And then after that residency, where did you go from there?
I did a fellowship training at Harvard, Boston Children's for pain medicine.
And what did your fellowship at Boston Children's / Harvard consist of?
My fellowship consists of pediatric pain management and adult pain management training.
Okay. And was that in connection with the operation of a clinic or a particular program for pediatric pain management?
Yeah, it was on Harvard-based Boston Children's Hospital.
Okay. And when did you go to your present location at Nemours Children's Hospital?
When, sir?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. When?
Yes. So I started at Nemours in 2013, January to be exact.
Okay. And could you tell me what your position is at Nemours Children's Hospital?
I'm the director of pain medicine.
Okay. And what does that entail?
Well, I direct the clinic, a pain management clinic on Nemours, and I oversee everything that is related to pain management.
Okay. Okay, so the jury understands. Can you explain what your pain management clinic does and what kind of care that it renders, what kind of patients it sees?
Yes. So my clinic, it's a multidisciplinary clinic, meaning multi-specialty. We see all patients with chronic pain, meaning more than 6 months of pain, and we see every type of pain, including musculoskeletal, headache, abdominal pain, etc.
Okay. And does your patient population include pediatric patients with chronic regional pain syndrome?
That's correct.
And could you tell us what percentage of your patient population is afflicted with that disease or that syndrome?
I cannot give you an exact number.
Okay.
But it's not the majority. It's more rare diagnosis.
Okay. And how frequently does chronic regional pain syndrome occur in the pediatric population?
It's also rare in the pediatric population.
Okay. And do you have experience in treating that disease?
Yes, correct. For the last decade, a
Okay.
little bit more.
Is the clinic at Nemours one of the few in Florida that specializes in pediatric chronic pain?
That's correct. Nemours in Orlando has one of the unique pain clinics for pediatric patients.
Okay. Was there a point at which you became aware of the case involving Maya Kowalski?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, ma'am. Was there a point in time at which you became aware of the case involving Maya Kowalski, in other words, of her medical needs?
We receive a phone call from an intensivist. I received a phone call from the intensivist about this patient.
Okay. Could you describe for us what phone call you received and what the purpose of the call was as far as you understood?
Objection, hearsay.
Yes.
Overruled.
The phone call was from an intensivist at my institution, Nemours Children's, requesting a transfer from all children from a patient with a diagnosis of complex regional pain syndrome.
And what was your response to that call?
My response is that I don't know this patient. I never evaluated the patient, and the call was specifically for a treatment that I don't perform. So it was intrathecal pump placement.
Okay. I was going to say, what treatment was it that you were asked to provide?
An intrathecal pump placement.
And was that treatment something that your institution provides for patients with chronic regional pain syndrome?
We do not.
Was that the extent of the call at that time?
That was the extent of the call.
Okay. And was there a subsequent communication that you had with the patient's mother, Beata Kowalski?
Yes. There was a phone call in which the mom was on the call trying to explain the patient condition and requesting again to be transferred for intrathecal pump placement.
And what was the mother's request of you in this telephone call that you had with her?
What I can recall is that she just mentioned that she needs an intrathecal pump placement, and if I can admit the patient and place it on her.
Okay. And do you recall the date of either of these calls, ma'am?
I don't recall it, but I have it on here. There were October 9 was one of them. October 9 of 2016.
Okay. And would you tell, let's backtrack a little bit. Was the first call that you had on October 9th?
The first call that I had was only from the intensivist.
Okay. And was that on October 9th?
I don't recall.
Okay.
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. And when did you actually wind up speaking with Mrs. Kowalski?
On a second phone encounter.
And what date was that, if you have it in your records there, or something you can refer to refresh your recollection?
Yes. I believe it was October 12th, 2015.
Okay. And who was on that call, please, ma'am?
With who?
Yes, ma'am. Who was on the telephone call that you had with the mother?
I only remember the mother.
Okay. Tell us as near as you can remember what Mrs. Kowalski said to you and what you explained to her about what you could or could not do with respect to the care of her daughter.
Yes. I just remembered that she mentioned several times that her daughter suffered from complex regional pain syndrome and that she wanted her to have an intrathecal pump placement. And my response to her was that I don't provide that treatment for that condition, but I'll be happy to see her in the outpatient setting in the clinic to make an evaluation and recommendations, which for complex regional pain syndrome, we have a standard program in our clinic where we keep the patients for an average of a month, Monday to Friday, doing physical therapy, occupational therapy, and behavioral therapy every day.
Okay.
she, at the end of the conversation, she agreed with the treatment, and that was it for that call.
Okay. And was your program, as you just described it, was that on an outpatient basis or an inpatient basis? How would that be administered to the patient?
Yes, it's an outpatient, Monday to Friday in the morning. So we start at 9 in the morning and it finishes around noon.
Okay. And how long does that go for?
For an average of 4 weeks.
And would that be preceded by an evaluation of the patient's needs and what the patient's diagnosis was?
Correct. So that's what I told mom. I will not actually admitting the patient for the program. I will need to evaluate the patient with my team. And in accordance to that evaluation, then we can make recommendation. And if we agree on the recommendation of the pain program as an outpatient setting, we will have her admitted at the pain program. But initially, there is an evaluation with the whole team.
Okay. And at that point in time, were you prepared to accept Maya Kowalski into this outpatient program that you've described for us?
No, again, I only hear about a diagnosis, but I need to make a confirmation of the diagnosis myself. And if she will be a candidate for the pain program, then we'll decide and tell the parents about a future admission to the program. But they will need an evaluation first.
Okay. So you were prepared to see her and evaluate her for the program?
I was prepared to see her and evaluate her in the clinic and make recommendations. It could be the program or it could be medication. It could be any other type of treatment because it's a multifactorial treatment.
Okay. That would be based on what you felt the diagnosis was?
Correct.
Okay. At that time, you've indicated that your program involved behavioral therapy, is that correct?
Correct.
At that time, did the Nemours Children's Hospital have an inpatient psychiatric program?
No.
Okay.
We never had a psychiatric program since we opened.
Okay, very good. That's all I have at this time, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, plaintiffs?
Nothing? No need to cross?
And members of the jury, do any of the jurors have any questions? Okay, seeing no questions, may this witness be excused.
Yes,
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, doctor. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you, doctor. Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Goodes.
Judge, can we approach briefly?
Sure. Next witness is going to be by deposition. Do you want to leave the lights on? Do you want me to dim it? Dim it just a little. Okay. Is this fine? I'm not going to go down any further.
Y'all trying to see?
Mr. Hunter, please call your next witness.
Your Honor, defense calls Dr. Kelly Lowry by deposition, videotape deposition.
My address of work. Doctor, will you raise your right hand, please? Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give today be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I will.
Dr. Lowry, can you please state your name and professional address for the record, please?
My name is Kelly Lowry. My address of work is 225 East Chicago Avenue, Chicago, Illinois, 60611.
And where are you presently employed?
Ann and Robert H. Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago.
Okay. And was that the same place you were employed back in July 2015 when you encountered the Kowalski family?
Yes.
Okay. Well, what is Lurie Children's Hospital?
It's a pediatric children's hospital.
Did you review anything in connection with preparing for today?
Yes.
What did you review?
My notes.
And those are your Lurie Children's notes?
Yes.
Can you give me the benefit of your training and education from the time that you graduated from high school or from college through any types of advanced training or degrees you have in your chosen field?
Sure. I received my bachelor's at West Virginia University. Following that, I went and received a doctorate in clinical psychology at the University of Florida. I completed a clinical internship here at Lurie Children's. I also completed a postdoctoral fellowship at Lurie Children's.
Let me ask you this. What is your current title?
Director of Training in Psychology.
Okay. Is that do you have a focus in the pediatric realm?
I do.
What about back in 2015 when you were handling the care of Maya Kowalski? What was your title back then?
Pediatric psychologist.
Okay. And what type of role does the pediatric psychologist play in a patient like Maya Kowalski?
The role that I played was I was an attending psychologist on our consultation liaison team.
And what are the types of things that you will do in furtherance of those duties?
Generally, our attending teams would receive consults from our medical colleagues, and we would interview and assess families to answer the questions that they had requested. And if applicable, we might make recommendations in those cases.
Okay. And did you have a PhD at the time that you cared for Maya Kowalski?
I did.
Okay. What other types of degrees did you have at that point?
I also have a master's degree, but the PhD is probably more relevant.
Well, and what's the PhD in?
Clinical psychology.
I'm just curious, just if you could just describe generally what the field of clinical psychology is.
It's a field that aims to, it's kind of broad, individuals who are engaged in the study and potentially treatment and evaluation of individuals who have psychological concerns.
Did you review any other documents, literature, medical records other than what we've described in preparation of today?
I did not.
How was it that you came to be involved as a psychologist for Maya Kowalski?
I was a member of the consultation liaison team, and I happened to receive the consultation request.
Based on my review of the history and physical, which is Exhibit 2 and LCH 140 through 145, and I'm going to put that up for you right now. It appears to me, based on my review of this, that a Dr. Byrne, B-Y-R-N-E, was the attending physician. And I'll scroll down here to the bottom of the H&P here. Do you see where it says Elizabeth A. Byrne, M.D.?
Yes.
And if a pediatric attending physician wants psychology involved, can you walk me through how in 2015 they would get someone like you involved in the workup of a patient?
Yeah, generally the process would be that the physician would put in an order for a psychiatric consult, and a member of the psychiatric consultation team would receive that consult and do an evaluation and make treatment recommendations if applicable. is the general process.
Continuing here with Dr. Burns' history and physical, which can be found on LCH 140 through LCH 145, I wanted to ask you about a few entries in there and see if you can tell me what the significance of these entries are in your field as a pediatric psychologist. On page 143 in the impression section, Dr. Byrne notes here, quote, her exam is not necessarily consistent with her history, which raises concern for a psychiatric component to her presentation and specifically conversion disorder. Do you see that?
I see that.
Okay. So I'm drawing you back to the portion that I just quoted into the record. Her exam is not necessarily consistent with her history, which raises concern for a psychiatric component to her presentation and specifically conversion disorder. My question is, as a clinical psychologist, what does that statement from Dr. Burns signify to you?
Okay. I don't want to kind of infer or speak for Dr. Byrne, but if I generally were to see a comment like that in a medical record and had received a consultation request, it would be consistent with wanting to get our team involved to further evaluate in that area for psychiatric components.
This phrase in other portions of the chart, psychiatric component to her presentation, what does that signify to you?
Again, generally speaking, psychiatric component to me would signify that there might be additional psychiatric contributors to a patient's presentation that might be in addition to or related or not related to other factors that might be contributing to the presentation.
And likewise, there's a reference here to, quote, conversion disorder. Can you please define what conversion disorder is?
Yeah, so generally speaking, conversion disorder is a psychiatric diagnosis that would indicate that there are psychological or psychiatric contributors to a particular presentation, which would on the surface appear more physical in nature.
Do you have any independent recollection, separate and apart from the notes of your interactions with Maya Kowalski or her family members back in July of 2015?
No.
So it's fair to say you're going to be guided more or less by the records? Okay. It says here at the very bottom where my cursor is, mom reports in recent hospitalizations, Maya has been resistant to separation from her mother. She does not like for conversations regarding her health to happen outside of the room and does not want her mother to leave her alone. Do you see that?
I see that.
What does that signify to you as someone who practices in your field?
Again, it's not my note, so I don't want to infer if that's Dr. Burns' note, kind of that thought process. I think independent of other data, it's just a comment.
One other thing that I see repeated throughout Maya's medical records here at Lurie's is this next line here where it says, quote, she intermittently moans but is distractible when talking about school, her friends, or her summer plans. Do you see that quote?
I do.
I've seen the word distractible referenced with respect to Maya's relationship. What does that term mean to you as a clinical psychologist?
Again, it's not my note, but when I see that somebody's distractible, I generally speaking would think that means that if they were presenting with pain and then something else can take their attention away from the pain.
In distractibility in the setting of a patient with either chronic pain or suspected psychiatric components, what distractibility mean to you as a clinical psychologist?
Generally speaking, again, I would interpret that as somebody whose attention can be drawn to things other than pain.
And why is that clinically significant to someone in your field?
And as an isolated piece of information, probably no one piece of information is kind of like.
At the very bottom of this addendum, do you see where my cursor is? And it says, quote, given these findings, there is concern for an underlying psychiatric etiology such as conversion disorder. Can you break that sentence down to me and tell me what is being described there by Dr. Byrne?
So generally speaking, I read that as Dr. Byrne felt that there might be a psychiatric contribution to the patient's presentation. And that might be an area that Dr. Byrne might have had thoughts or concerns about. But for my purpose, generally speaking, if I receive a consult like this, it's just reason for consult.
Okay. Well, since there was an objection, why don't you describe how you get involved in a patient's care, such as Maya Kowalski back in the July 2015 timeframe at Lurie Children's?
Yeah, so generally speaking, for the consultation service, the medical psychiatry consultation service, we receive orders, requests for consults from our medical colleagues to get involved in specific cases.
Gotcha. Now I'd like to draw your attention to our next exhibit here, which is going to be at LCH 189 through LCH 192. And it appears to be a consult note by a Claudio S. Rivera that is subsequently electronically signed by you on July 23, 2015. Do you see the Mr. Rivera's note from 7/22/2015?
I see that.
My first question would be, who is Claudio Rivera?
Claudio was a psychology intern working with me at the time.
And in this case, it looks like you electronically signed this exhibit we're looking at back in July 23, 2015 at 11:04. I'll scroll down there for you so you can see what I'm talking about. On 192, do you see there? Right where my cursor is.
I see that.
Okay. And so fair to say you would have reviewed Mr. Rivera's note and then signed off on it?
That's the general practice.
So you see on 189 here where it says psychologist attending note. You're the psychologist attending?
Yes.
Okay. And it says here, I saw Maya and her mother and reviewed the medical chart. Do you see that?
I see that.
And that's part of the process I think you just described about how you get involved and work a patient up, correct?
Correct.
And you also indicate here, I discussed this case with Mr. Rivera. That's Claudio Rivera, the psych intern that you were talking about earlier.
Yes.
And it appears here as of the date of service, you agreed with the consult, assessment, and recommendations as outlined. Do you see that?
I see that.
Okay, is that a correct statement?
Correct.
Based on your documentation here, what was the reason for the consultation with the pediatric psychology department there at Lurie's back in July of 2015?
Yeah, so what I'm seeing in the note is that the medical psychology consult service was consulted to assess for psychological origin of pain symptoms, specifically conversion disorder.
And when you say psychological origin of pain syndromes, what do you mean there?
Generally speaking, we're thinking about contributors that are outside of a purely kind of physical contribution to a pain presentation.
Okay. Now, looking through here, the history of presenting illness, medical surgical history, allergies, do you know where you would have obtained that information back in 2015 for placement into the chart?
Yeah, so generally speaking, the information that is noted in our consultation write-up is generally brought from review of the medical record, interview with the patient, frequently interview with a family or other relevant parties.
Would that also include family social history that we see at the bottom of 190?
Yes, generally speaking.
Question: what is the mental status exam portion of this note? Why is this there? What are you describing?
Yeah, so generally speaking, this part of our note includes the outward behavioral observations that were observed at the time of the interview and the assessment, both in a narrative form, as you see at the top, and then in very specific areas as are listed below that.
Okay, and in there, second sentence, it says here, quote, she was casually dressed and slight of build. And then after that, it says, quote, during the consult, she sat up in a wheelchair with support from her mother prior to being carried to her bed. She lay face down on the bed for the majority of the consult. Do you see that?
I see that.
What is the clinical significance of placing that entry into the chart?
Generally speaking, we just tried to describe the presentation of the patient at the time we did the assessment.
And continuing on after that sentence, it says, quote, she presented as distressed at times, which consisted of her moaning. She appeared able to regulate her distress, specifically when responding from the psych consult team. What is being described in this portion of your note?
Yeah, so what it looks like Mr. Rivera is describing is that she presented as moaning at times, which we interpreted as distressed. But when specific questions or comments were made by our team, she was able to regulate or kind of manage that distress at some way.
And why, for a patient like Maya Kowalski, would that be a clinically relevant thing to put into a medical chart?
Yeah, so generally speaking, it meant that, we would include that to indicate that she does have some ability to manage her pain symptoms, or there are perhaps periods of our observation of her at which she appeared to be able to manage her pain.
And then continuing on with this paragraph, it says, quote, Maya was able to respond to providers without attending to pain symptoms. Do you see that?
I see that.
To the best of your knowledge, what is Mr. Rivera describing here in this note that you signed off on?
Yeah, so what I see there is that when Maya was responding, her pain symptoms decreased.
I'd like to jump forward a little bit on this note. We've gone through a little bit of the mental status exam, and then we get to the impressions section here, which is at the bottom of 191 and then runs over to 192. Impression, you see where it says Maya is a 9-year-old girl who was admitted to LCH for pain and weakness following a transfer from an outside hospital. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then it says down here DSM-4 diagnoses. That's what is the DSM-4?
The DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, 4th edition. It is the listing of psychiatric diagnoses that was standard practice at the time of this consult.
Well, I know we're up to DSM-5 now, but back at the time, it seems like we were on DSM-4.
Yes, that's correct.
What is this DSM-4 diagnoses section here describing on LCH 192?
Yeah, so generally speaking, that section describes our initial diagnoses at the time of our initial consult.
And what were your initial diagnoses as reflected here?
Yeah, so on Axis 1, the diagnosis was psychological factors affecting physical condition, ruling out conversion disorder, ruling out an anxiety disorder. No diagnosis indicated at that time for Axis 2, allergies, asthma, recent onset of pain, numbing, weakness, generalized to her body. On Axis 3, mild problems with social environment, Axis 4, and a global assessment at Axis 5 of 41 to 50, which is indicative of serious symptoms and functional impairment.
Let me take you back to this Axis 1. Is the diagnosis psychological factors affecting physical condition?
Yes, that's a diagnosis.
And what does that mean if you're trying to explain this to perhaps a lay juror who doesn't have the level of expertise that you do in this field?
Yeah, generally speaking, that indicates that there are psychological contributors that are impacting an individual's physical presentation.
When it says below what we just talked about, RO conversion disorder, what does that mean?
Generally speaking, those are on our differential and things we are continuing to rule in or out, but have not yet.
So in other words...
So generally speaking, it's not a confirmed diagnosis, but it's part of the broader differential under consideration.
Hasn't been ruled in, hasn't been ruled out yet, as of this.
Generally speaking, that's correct.
Let me ask you the same question. When it says R/O anxiety disorder, what does that mean?
Same thing.
Okay.
Same as the conversion disorder answer.
It hasn't been ruled, hasn't been ruled in, hasn't been ruled out yet.
Generally speaking, yes.
Okay. And is that part of the reason why the psychiatric team was involved in this workup to rule in or out certain things like conversion or anxiety?
Yeah, as the consult note indicated, it looks like we were consulted to assess for psychological origin or contributors to the pain.
And as of this date, are you leaning towards a finding that there are some psychological factors that affect the physical condition?
That was the diagnosis at the time of that initial consult.
And then I think you made some recommendations at this point too. You mind describing what those were?
Yeah, so I think if you scroll further down in my note, in Mr. Rivera's note, it indicates our initial recommendations.
Okay. And I'm looking at that section now, and I think I have it up on screen share. It says, consider rehab model for treatment consultation from RIC.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean?
Yeah, so generally speaking, we're looking we're making a recommendation to the medical team to consider a rehabilitation model. RIC is a rehabilitation center that we frequently partnered with that, if indicated, may sometimes also come and do an independent consultation to see if they concur.
Is RIC also known as the Rehab Institute of Chicago?
Yes.
Okay. And what do you mean by rehab model? What does that term mean?
Yeah, so generally speaking, it's a type of treatment that would, again, it's a little bit outside of my scope of practice because I don't work in a rehab setting, but generally speaking, it's a treatment and intervention model that frequently would have both medical and psychological or psychiatric providers, as well as an emphasis on things like physical therapy or occupational therapy or other types of specialized treatments if indicated for the patient, with a function typically on with a focus typically on increasing function.
And on the second prong of your recommendations, it says here, continue ongoing assessment for MedPsych and consider non-pharmacologic interventions for pain management along with parent support. Do you see that?
Yes.
Can you please explain what Mr. Rivera is describing in that portion of his recommendation section?
Sorry. So he is saying that, we will continue to be involved in the case. And it's for the medical team, the attending medical provider to consider, it might be appropriate for us to start to introduce some of these non-pharmacologic interventions that might benefit the patient in their pain management and ability to manage and moderate their pain experience.
And then non-pharmacologic, that just means no medication intervention, am I correct?
Yes, it indicates, I'm a clinical psychologist. I do not prescribe, so it indicates the types of interventions that are appropriate to our scope of practice.
Okay. And then it says down here, MedPsych, which we just said was you, is in support of consults with art therapy, music therapy, and child life. Do you see that?
I do.
Why were those three modalities something that the MedPsych team was in support of?
Yeah, I don't recall specifically, but generally speaking, we would see those types of services as being beneficial if we felt that, additional kind of structure, additional type of opportunities for engagement in other services, distractions, scheduling, kind of getting other people involved to help provide some assistance to a patient. There's lots of reasons why we might think about those three specifically. But generally speaking, they're positive, well-received types of interventions for our pediatric patients that can provide structure to their day as well as have a therapeutic emphasis that might also be helpful to patients like Maya who seem to be experiencing pain.
And then the last recommendation prong here, it says consider multidisciplinary team coordinated care conference to provide Maya and family with impressions and treatment recommendations. What is being described in that sentence?
Yeah, so generally speaking, that would indicate that we felt it might be beneficial just to essentially bring the providers in the room together to talk about our impressions and recommendations and to present that to the family in a joint manner.
And so it's not foreign to you at Lurie's to refer to a collection of treating providers as part of a, quote, team?
It is not.
No, I'm correct that this is a progress note authored by you on July 22, 2015?
Yes.
And it says service psychiatry. One question I had here about you, you're not a psychiatrist, you're a psychologist by trade, I think?
Yes.
Let's go through this first note here and just kind of dissect it a little bit. You see where it says, quote, our team met with Maya and her mother today in response to consult requests to assess for psychological contributors to Maya's current presentation of symptoms and expressions of pain.
I see that.
So, Dr. Lowry, can you please describe what you are explaining here in this first sentence in your progress note?
So generally speaking, that first sentence is a reiteration of what we did that day.
Okay. Which was essentially what?
We met with the patient, we met with her mother in response to the consult order from our medical peers for the purposes of assessing for psychological contributors to the pain presentation.
In the next sentence here, you write, quote, Maya endursed significant pain with physical presentations of moaning, grimacing, and writhing. What are you describing in that portion of your note?
So that appears to me to be a reiteration of what we described in more detail in the behavioral observations of the full consult to follow.
So you had an opportunity to physically observe this finding as well, per your note?
Per my note, it says our team met with, so.
Are you part of the team?
I'm part of the team.
Okay. And then you say concurrently, Maya was able to also cease pain expressions, entirely track and participate in conversation. What are you describing there?
Yeah, so I read my note as that Maya was also at times able to present without that grimacing, moaning, writhing types of, behaviors, and was able to appropriately participate in the conversation and the questions that our team asked of her.
Why don't we go down to the second paragraph here, where you see where it says our full consult will follow, but our initial impressions at this time suggest that psychological factors could be contributing, possibly through maintenance of pain symptoms in response to an initial stressor or physical change. Do you see that?
I see that.
Kind of break that sentence down for me and tell me what this sentence means to somebody who might not have a PhD in clinical psychology.
Okay. So generally speaking, that sentence is essentially a narrative reiteration of our diagnosis that we had made in the full consult to follow, that we did think that there were psychological contributors likely to Maya's pain experience. And we weren't sure, so hence the possibly. But one way in which sometimes that can present is to continue pain symptoms, even if it's in response to a physical contribution initially.
Can you please summarize what your 5 recommendations from Maya were as of July 22, 2015?
Yes. So our first recommendation was, just to support our medical colleagues in continuing to do their workup of contributions to the pain. The second recommendation, consistent with what we've discussed, was our support of considering consults from our colleagues in art therapy, music therapy, and child life. The third recommendation, as previously discussed, was to consider a rehab model for treatment and to consult our colleagues in the rehab space. Our fourth recommendation was to consider, again, kind of bringing the full team together to discuss this diagnosis, these diagnoses, these treatment recommendations with the family. And then the fifth recommendation, typo there, was that we'll continue essentially to follow along the case with our medical colleagues as long as they, will continue to follow.
All right, and it appears there was a first inpatient visit that was conducted, and the social worker, Ms. Allen here, where my cursor is, says, quote, patient woke up during conversation with mother and became tearful, calling for mother to return to the hospital room. Does that seem like it could be something that's significant to a member of a med psych team such as yourself? Yeah, just like this statement here, patient woke up during conversation with mother and became tearful, calling for mother to return to the hospital room. Is that something that you encounter frequently with pediatric patients?
As an isolated statement, it's not particularly meaningful. We work with kids, and sometimes kids get upset when their parents are or aren't present.
Later on, during a second inpatient visit down here, do you see where it says, quote, patient abruptly stated in voice deeper than regular voice, quote, I don't do gymnastics anymore. Mm-hmm. And then later on, the patient stated, I can't be distracted. Distraction doesn't work on me. My question is, this reference to distraction, is that similar to what you previously described earlier in your testimony?
Since it wasn't a note from our team, I can't really comment on whether they meant it in the same way that I meant it or not.
167, I believe this to be your second note. Do you see the note that I'm talking about here, Dr. Lowry? It's Kelly Lowry, PhD, 7/23/15, 1455. Do you see that?
I see that.
Very end here, it says, you guys are going to try some parenting strategies likely to reduce unintentional reinforcement of pain behaviors. What does that mean?
So generally speaking, there are ways that an adult or peer can respond to a pain presentation that has the potential to decrease or increase or maintain pain expressions. And so I read that as, generally speaking, we were likely thinking that some of that level of intervention might be beneficial.
I wanted to draw your attention to another note here from Lori Allen, the social worker. It's from 7/23/15. There's a section in this note where the social worker is indicating that she has accompanied Dr. Byrne and Dr. Whaley for morning rounds. And then down here it says Dr. Byrne explained that patient's pain is psychogenic conversion disorder. Do you see that?
See that?
Can you please describe or define actually what psychogenic conversion disorder means?
Yeah, so again, I don't want to infer Dr. Byrne's words.
In your experience as a licensed clinical psychologist, if you see a doctor note, Dr. Byrne explained that patient's pain is psychogenic conversion disorder what does that mean to you as a licensed clinical psychologist?
Generally speaking, psychogenic means that there's a psychiatric or psychological contribution. And conversion disorder, I interpret as we previously discussed and defined.
And so do you recognize this as your note here? It says on LCH 154, electronically signed by Kelly Lowry on 7/24/15.
I do.
It indicates here, I met with the family this afternoon through participation in a multidisciplinary care conference. Am I correct in assuming that was the team get together with the family and various providers that you were referencing earlier?
I believe so.
Quote, in summary, our initial impressions at this time suggest that psychological factors could be contributing, possibly through maintenance of pain syndrome symptoms in response to an initial stressor or physical change. And again, what are you describing in that clause?
So again, that's a reiteration of our diagnosis of psychological factors affecting physical condition.
And it looks like you list out 1, 2, 3, 4 recommendations for this patient. Do you see those in your note?
I see that.
How do those recommendations change from your previous recommendations that you documented?
I do not believe that they did.
It says here, right about where my cursor is, quote, had a care conference with Maya's mother, father via telephone, social work, patient relations, and psychology to discuss the plan of care. Is that the multidisciplinary conference that you referenced earlier in your testimony?
I believe so.
And again, anything we're talking about today is a refresher recollection of this patient specifically, independent from what you may have reviewed in the chart.
I do not have independent recollection.
Dr. Byrne, it says here, quote, I discussed with Maya's mother that I believe that there is no organic cause to her symptoms. Do you know what Dr. Byrne is referencing in that portion of her addendum?
Again, I don't want to interpret her words for her, but generally I read that as the medical team has determined that they do not feel that there's a kind of physical contributor to Maya's pain or Maya's presentation of symptoms.
Okay. And then it also says here, given her extensive symptoms, recommend intensive multidisciplinary care involving physical therapy, psychology, and pain specialists. Do you see that?
I see that.
In patients similar to Maya, is that the type of treatment modality that you've seen recommended on occasion?
Yeah, generally speaking, that seems a consistent or reasonable recommendation.
Just so the record's clear, I will be introducing this as an exhibit as well. It's Maya Kowalski's discharge summary from Lurie Children's Hospital. It's dated July 24, 2015, and it's at LCH 128 through 134, and I believe it is signed by Dr. Byrne on LCH 134. Do you have any role or involvement in preparing a patient's discharge summary, doctor?
No.
Do you know how Dr. Byrne would have gone through and prepared her discharge summary?
Not specifically, no.
Throughout the discharge summary and elsewhere, and I'll pull up an example on 130 here under neuro, it says alert, interactive, intermittently screaming and crying, but distractible with questioning. Do you see that?
I see that.
Okay, is that consistent with some of the previous entries you've seen regarding the patient having, some screaming and moaning and crying, but would also be distractible when talking about other topics?
That seems consistent.
And Dr. Byrne reports patient was seen by child psychology during hospital stay. Do you see that?
I see that.
Am I correct in assuming that child psychology is you and your department?
Correct.
And then Dr. Byrne says, quote, their opinion as follows, and she quotes a fairly long passage there. Do you see that long passage?
I see that.
You recognize the opinions from the child psychology group that appear in this note to be the recommendations that you gave for this patient that we've already previously discussed?
Yes.
And then towards the end, impression and plan, we're getting towards the end here. Dr. Byrne notes, quote, her exam is not necessarily consistent with her history, which raises concern for a psychiatric component to her presentation and specifically conversion disorder. Do you see that?
I see that.
And I think we talked about similar notes in the chart related to this before, correct?
Correct.
Based on your review of the notes at issue, do you agree or disagree with this impression from Dr. Byrne that I just quoted?
So in my review of my records, our diagnosis was psychological factors affecting physical condition, and we were still ruling in or out conversion disorder. But we had commented that we felt that psychological factors were contributing or could be contributing.
Hey, one other thing, I'd like to just show you the consent form that that Maya's mother signed in this case, and see if you recognize it as the type of consent form that they use at Lurie's. I'm going to mark this as an exhibit as well, LCH 152 to 153. Have you ever seen a consent to examination and treatment form from Lurie Children's Hospital before, Dr. Lowry?
Yes.
Okay. Is this what I'm showing you here, the type of consent form that a parent or patient would sign upon admission to Lurie Children's?
I'm not able to read the entire note, but it appears to be consistent with our consents.
Okay. And I see in one portion here, it says, I hereby authorize Lurie Children's and its medical staff to take photographs, video, digital, and other images of me, my child for treatment, education, and research purposes, end quote. Do you see that portion?
I see that.
Are there times as a clinical psychologist where it might be helpful to take a picture or video of a child?
Yeah, there might be situations where that would be beneficial.
All right. Has anything today, Doctor, triggered any recollection outside of the notes that we testified about? Because, I typically talk to people about their independent recollection and what they charted. Did anything today bring up anything independent?
I do not have independent recollection.
Maya Kowalski was your patient for a period of time in the summer of 2015, was she not?
We were consulted to make an assessment of her.
And through the course of this, you spent approximately how long with her, would you say? Personally?
Can we pause for a moment?
I don't
Less
recall.
than an hour?
I don't recall.
Okay, members of the jury, let me turn on the lights. I am told that it actually completes what we're going to be playing of that deposition. So I think this is probably a good time for a break. Do not discuss this case amongst yourselves. Do not do any investigation and receive no information. Let's try to take a 10-minute break.
All rise. Jurors exit.
Okay, everyone can be seated. So everything that was played was actually your designation?
Yeah.
There may have been a few here and there that were read, but we'll take it.
So approximately 40 minutes was played?
Well, let's check, Judge, that they can check the thing. We'll check, because they did designate some things on our
Okay.
direct.
38 minutes.
Was ours?
Tell you what, why don't I just say 35 minutes and then we're done?
That sounds fine.
Okay. How about those 4 photos?
So there's more than 4, Judge, but I've shown them to Mr. Anderson. It's my understanding there's no objection.
No objection.
Okay, let's get them in evidence.
I'm going to put them in evidence, Judge, to be clear, we need the second page because it has the date.
I understand.
Okay.
No objection on that.
Okay. All right, Judge, so do you want just to announce for the record?
Sure.
Okay, ready? It's perfect. Okay, 30, they all are part of 3232, but then there's 4 digits afterwards identifying the photo. So 32320962, 32320810 and 0811, 32320439 and 0440, 32320354, 0355, 32320345, 0346, 32320365, 0366.
Okay, the court receives into evidence all of the Exhibit 3232 pages 0365 through 0366, 0345 through 0346, 0354 through 0355, 0439 through 0440, 0810 through 0811, and 0962. Did I get all that right, Madam Clerk?
And to be clear, Judge, those aren't all photographs. The second page is the date, so that's why there's 2 pages to some of them.
Okay, anything else before we take our break?
Nothing to have planned.
Let's try to keep it to 10 minutes.
All rise. This court is in recess.
Okay, please be seated, everyone. Are we ready to bring in the jury?
Please so, Your Honor. Yes, Your Honor.
Let's bring in the jury. All rise. Jurors entering. Okay, please be seated, everyone. Members of the jury, I want to confirm while you're away, you did not discuss this case amongst yourselves, you did no investigation and received no information. Is that all correct?
Correct.
And you've had no contact with anyone about this case, is that correct? And you haven't seen any media coverage about this case?
Correct.
Okay. Well, Mr. Hunter, your next witness, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. If the police court, the defense calls Dr. Elliot Crane.
You solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes, I do.
Come this way.
Police court. Good morning.
Good morning.
Would you tell us your name, please, sir?
Elliot Crane.
And what is your occupation, Dr. Crane?
I'm a physician.
And where do you presently practice your profession?
Actually, I retired on May 1st, but prior to that, Stanford University at in the School of Medicine.
Okay. And you retired, when was it, May 1st?
May the 1st.
Okay. And tell us, if you would, please, sir, where you received your background, your education and training to become a physician.
I went to medical school at the University of Arizona in Tucson, Arizona, graduating in 1977. And from there, I did pediatric residency at the Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. Following that, an anesthesiology residency at the same hospital. And then a fellowship in pediatric anesthesia and critical care medicine at Boston Children's Hospital. And that was all finishing at the end of 1983.
Are those programs at Massachusetts General and Boston Children's affiliated with Harvard?
Yes, they are.
And did you become board certified?
Yes, I did.
And would you tell the jury what specialties you became board certified in?
First in pediatrics, and then anesthesiology. Both of those were in 1985. And then in subsequent years also not long after that in pediatric critical care medicine, intensive care medicine. And then after that in pediatric anesthesiology, once that specialty board was established, which wasn't for a few years, and also pain medicine.
And what have you focused your practice on over the last few decades?
Initially, it was in 1984. It was a combination of pediatric anesthesiology and pediatric critical care medicine. And it wasn't long after that, about 1985, my interest began to shift to pediatric pain management, and that grew as pediatric critical care shrunk. And then it's been largely pediatric pain medicine for the last 20, 25 years.
Okay. And where have you had occasion to practice your profession?
After my fellowship training, the first place that I went to work was at the University of Washington, practicing. That was my academic appointment, practicing at the Seattle Children's Hospital. And then about 11 years later, I was recruited to go down to Stanford University, which had a new children's hospital, to be the chief of pediatric anesthesiology and to establish a pediatric anesthesiology group there.
And did you do that?
I did.
Okay. And did there come a point at which you established a pediatric pain clinic at Stanford University?
Yeah, we set up the pain clinic not long after I arrived at Stanford in 1994. And it was a small clinic to begin with, and it grew rapidly over time.
Okay. Tell us what the focus and scope of the pain clinic at Stanford has been over the past 20-some-odd years, 30-some-odd years.
Well, at the beginning, it was a day a week, and then it was 2 days a week and 3 days a week, and it wasn't long before it was 5 days a week. Now we're seeing maybe 11,000 appointments a year. So it's become quite busy. It's a multidisciplinary clinic. So we have on staff pediatric pain medicine specialists. Right now there's 7 of them. And pediatric psychologists, also 7. We have pediatric psychology postdoctoral students, 4 or 5 of those. Physical therapists. And then we also work with occupational therapists and child psychiatry.
And as of 2016 and 2017, what was your role at that clinic?
At that point, let's see, that was 7, 8 years ago, right? So at that point, I'm just trying to, so at that point, I had pretty much stopped doing pediatric anesthesiology. It was limited to maybe 2 days a month. And not long after that, I stopped altogether. And the rest of my practice was devoted entirely to pain medicine for children.
Okay. And it did at that time, and since you've been involved in it, has the pediatric pain clinic at Stanford dealt with pediatric chronic regional pain syndrome?
Complex regional pain syndrome, yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, mispronunciated. To what extent have you been involved in the treatment, in the diagnosis, evaluation, and treatment of pediatric complex regional pain syndrome?
To what extent? Well, we see probably at the present maybe 100 new cases a year, about 2 a week, I would say, some weeks more. And we work together as a team, so it isn't as if one physician kind of owns a patient. We share the care of the patient, so I've been involved with all of those patients over the last several decades.
Okay. And what other types of pain syndromes does the pediatric pain clinic at Stanford treat?
We see a little bit of acute pain, so sometimes surgeons will send kids to us postoperatively if they're struggling with their pain management, but primarily it's chronic pain. Chronic pain being defined as pain that's lasted longer than 3 months, usually past the healing of whatever initiated it. So we see a wide spectrum of pain problems. Our referrals come from orthopedic surgeons, general surgeons, urologic surgeons, pediatricians, oncologists. So we see cancer pain. We see a lot of, I'd say complex regional pain syndrome is one of our most common, maybe the most common diagnoses. Fibromyalgia, chronic headaches, migraine headaches, chronic abdominal pain, especially functional abdominal pain, limb pain disorders. We see kids with congenital birth defects, congenital anomalies that are associated with pain, even benign tumors such as fibromatosis can be associated with pain. So basically, like all of those patients.
Do you also have occasion to deal with patients who have psychogenic pain syndromes?
It's not exactly the term I would use. We have patients whose pain is primarily manifestation of a psychological process. We call that somatoform pain. It's not unlike patients, well, I'll put it this way. There's a number of functional disorders. So, such as migraine headaches would be considered a functional disorder. In other words, it's functional in the sense that there's no brain tumor or brain infection or anything like that causing the headache. So the child's functional in that sense. There's also functional abdominal pain where the patient has significant abdominal pain. They go to a gastroenterologist, they get a full workup, they get endoscopy, colonoscopy perhaps. Nothing is found. They refer the patient to us, so they have a totally functional GI tract, but they have pain. The pain is not in their head, so that's not really psychogenic pain. But we do have patients who present with pain that's not obvious from any other source, or it may be amplified pain, where we know that they have pain from some discrete source, but it's amplified to a much higher degree than one would expect it to be. And we call that somatoform pain.
Okay. During the course of your practice, have you had occasion to contribute to the medical literature regarding pediatric chronic pain?
Yes.
And to what extent have you done that?
I can't give you the number of publications. There are book chapters I've written, or edited one book and written one book on chronic pain, and many articles, but I can't tell you off the top of my head. And of course, I've lectured dozens and dozens of lectures around the world on the management of different types of chronic pain.
Have you lectured on the subject of complex regional pain syndrome in the
Yes,
pediatric
I have.
setting?
Yes, I have.
And how often have you done that? Do you have any estimate?
Well, there's 100 to 200 lectures that I've given over the years, some on chronic pain, including complex regional pain syndrome, some exclusively on complex regional pain syndrome, and there are a number of videos that I've made on the subject of CRPS in children.
Okay. Have you had occasion to serve as an editor or reviewer for various medical journals?
Yes, I've been an editor of a journal that's an online journal called Children, a medical journal, and I'm a reviewer for many scholarly journals, such as Pain, the Journal of Pain and Symptom Management, Regional Anesthesia and Pain Medicine, Anesthesia and Analgesia, Anesthesiology, Pediatrics, the Journal of Pediatrics, and others.
Okay. You've been kind enough to give us a copy of your curriculum vitae or your resume. The indication is that your bibliography includes 79 peer-reviewed articles.
Yes,
Does
sir.
that sound correct?
That's about right.
Okay. And what is a peer-reviewed article?
Peer-reviewed article is an article or a manuscript that's written up to report the results of research or to summarize a subject that's then sent to a journal and peer-reviewed. Peer-reviewed means that it's sent out anonymously to 2 or 3 or 4 experts in the field internationally. They review the article, they give it a thumbs up, or they give it a thumbs down, or they give it a maybe, with that they'll accept it with alterations or modifications. Then it goes under a revision, and then it's resubmitted, etc., until it's finally approved by the peers, and then by the editor of the journal.
Okay. Doctor, at my request, have you reviewed probably more materials than you wanted to regarding this case of Maya Kowalski?
I have.
Okay. And I'm going to read from a list of materials that you've told me you reviewed. I just want you to let the jury know that you've done that.
I will.
Have you reviewed the records of Tampa General Hospital regarding Ms. Kowalski?
Yes.
The records of all Children's Hospital regarding Maya Kowalski?
Yes.
The records of Lurie Children's Hospital?
Yes.
Dr. John Wasenauer's records?
Correct.
Dr. Kirkpatrick's records?
Yes.
Dr. Hanna's records?
Yes.
The records of Agility PT and sports performance?
Yes.
The Eagles Wing rehabilitation records? Or? records of?
I believe so, yes.
The records of the Sarasota County School Board?
Don't remember if I've reviewed those, actually.
Okay. Have you reviewed Dr. James Lewis's report?
Yes,
And the report of Dr. Chopra?
yes,
Dr. Sally Smith's evaluation?
yes,
The evaluations of both Maya and Beata Kowalski by Tashana Duncan?
correct.
And then the depositions of Mr. Kowalski,
Yes.
Dr. Elliott,
Dr. Elliott, yes.
Dr. Wasnauer,
Yes,
Dr. Hanna,
yes.
and I think I asked you if you reviewed his records. Have you reviewed Dr. Hinchke's records?
I don't remember. Who's he again?
Hinchke,
Hinchke?
psychiatrist.
Yes,
Have you reviewed the depositions of Drs. Hanna, Revivo, and Santana Rojas?
yes,
And the depositions of Dr. Cantu, as well as that of, Dr. Cantu.
yes.
Are there other records that you've reviewed regarding the case?
Yes, there are some blog entries by Maya's mother and some emails from Maya's mother to herself. And let me see what else. Photographs, some photographs of Maya at different times of her life.
Okay. All right. Let me backtrack a bit if I can and just ask you some general questions regarding complex regional pain syndrome and some of the other syndromes that bring us together today.
Yep.
Tell the jury, if you would, what chronic regional pain syndrome is from the standpoint of someone who treats that condition in your specialty.
Complex regional pain syndrome.
I'm sorry, what did I say?
Chronic.
I'm sorry, complex regional pain syndrome.
A lot of people do that because it is a chronic regional pain syndrome. So complex regional pain syndrome means what the words say. It's complex, it's complicated. The cause of it is not known. There's several hypotheses, but over the last decades, we still haven't nailed down exactly what the primary cause is. There's probably a genetic vulnerability that leads to it. It's regional in that it affects a region of the body. Typically, in children, a leg. Typically, in adults, it's an arm, which is mainly a factor of what kids are doing versus what adults are doing. Kids are running around soccer fields and football fields and baseball fields and have leg injuries, very commonly twisted ankles, for example. Whereas adults don't do that, but they'll oftentimes trip and fall and break their fall with an outstretched arm, and that will start it off. It usually follows a rather trivial injury, like a sprain. It can obviously follow a more significant injury, like a broken bone. Sometimes it follows surgery. It affects initially one limb of the body that has had the sprain or the operation or the fall or what have you. And it begins at some point after that injury occurs. I have a colleague who's an orthopedic surgeon who gets CRPS repetitively. He's an outdoor runner. He's a trail runner. So he's frequently stepping in gopher holes or snake holes and twisting his ankle. And what he tells me is that
Sustained.
all right, I'll skip past that. So at some point in time, it can be days or a week or two after the injury occurs, the pain shifts from the pain of the injury, a twisted ankle or what have you, to what we call neuropathic pain, which is pain that has its origins in the nervous system. Oftentimes by that point in time, the original injury is healing. And the pain is very different than the kind of throbbing deep pain of a broken bone or a twisted ankle. The pain moves to the surface of the limb, the skin, which has a burning quality. It becomes exquisitely sensitive to touch, even the lightest touch, such as pulling a garment of clothes over that skin, is so excruciating the child can't do it. They can't sleep with bed sheets over their affected leg. They sleep with their leg either dangling off the bed or on top of the bed sheets. And then there's physical findings associated with it as well as the symptoms the child's reporting. Very specific physical findings. This goes on for a length of time until treatment begins.
And what, in your experience, is well, first of all, you've described for us how many cases, or an estimate of how many cases the pain clinic at Stanford has seen in the pediatric setting. How frequently does this disease occur in pediatric patients?
Well, most pediatricians will never see a case in their entire career, so it's that infrequent. Consequently, most pediatricians aren't even aware of it or don't know what to do with it. Typically, somebody comes in with this exquisite limb pain and they'll send the child to an orthopedic surgeon. And most orthopedic surgeons are aware of this problem because it occurs in their practice. And then they'll send the patient on to a pain clinic. Sometimes it's seen by a physical medicine or rehabilitation specialist, sometimes a neurologist. So the frequency is not really known. It's probably on the order of 1 in 100,000 children that get this. But as I said, it's so infrequent that most pediatricians aren't aware of it and will never see it in their lifetime.
How is it that your clinic sees that many patients if it occurs that infrequently?
Well, there's something like 50 million people or 45 million people in the state of California. We're the only multidisciplinary pain clinic in the state of California, the fullest service pain clinic, so we get referrals from all over the state, as well as from neighboring states, Washington, Oregon, Arizona, Utah, Nevada, and as far away as the East Coast. We've had patients come to us from Virginia, Boston, Pennsylvania, and we've had patients come to us internationally from various countries in South America, Australia, New Zealand, England, for example. Okay. We get patients from all over because of the reputation that we have.
Okay. And to what extent, well, within the universe of pediatric complex regional pain patients, how many present with so-called whole body CRPS?
None. Nobody does.
And why is that?
Because, as I said, it starts in a limb. It's a regional pain syndrome. It can, in some cases, spread, and it does spread, but not right away, not early in the disease. Usually it's after months or actually more like years. It can affect the opposite limb. It can spread proximally. It can affect an arm. So it can spread, but it typically spreads to other limbs. It doesn't spread to other parts of the body. I can't say why that is, but that's certainly the case.
What is the recognized treatment in your experience for pediatric complex regional pain syndrome?
The most important, the foundation of treatment, the kind of treatment without which it will not get better, is physical therapy and occupational therapy. Occupational therapy is a little bit different than physical therapy. Even though the child doesn't have an occupation, it's still what it's called. But a combination of physical therapy, occupational therapy, and psychotherapy by a qualified psychologist. Those are the fundamental things that will make it better. Everything else, we do other things, of course, but everything else that we do for CRPS, complex regional pain syndrome, is only useful in as much as it supports physical therapy and occupational therapy. So, for example, if the child cannot tolerate physical therapy because their limb is so painful, we might add medications to reduce the pain. We can't eliminate the pain, but we can reduce the pain. We might do a nerve block to put that limb to sleep, which is effective for a limited period of time. We can't block the nerve for weeks or months, but we can for days to get the kids started in physical therapy. So the other things that we might do are only useful in as much as they facilitate the practice of physical therapy, without which we can't make patients better.
Is there a role for ketamine in the treatment of pediatric chronic complex regional pain syndrome?
We do use ketamine at Stanford. There's a number of places around the country, a small number of places around the country, that use low-dose ketamine in children. There are still many, if not most, children's hospitals, if they have a pain service, restrict the use of ketamine to the intensive care unit environment in any dose. We have a more liberal hospital, and we were able to convince them that using low-dose ketamine outside the intensive care unit is safe. And it's something that we reserve for refractory cases that we cannot make better after a full court press, which would be intensive physical therapy every day for weeks, typically 10 or 12 weeks, psychotherapy every day for the same period of time, and using all the drugs that we have on the shelf that are to some degree effective in CRPS. If those things don't work, we will then put the child in the hospital for a 5 to 7 day ketamine infusion, but as I said, it's a low dose ketamine infusion in contrast to what was used in Maya.
While we're on that subject, can you define for the jury a low dose as opposed to a higher dose?
Our ceiling maximum dose is 1 milligram per kilogram per hour, which we've only used in one patient over the last decades. Typically, we start at about 0.1 milligram per kilogram per hour, and we increase the dose every 6 or 8 hours by 0.1 milligram per kilogram per hour until we reach a dose which is effective in reducing pain, or a dose at which unacceptable side effects occur, or a dose at which sedation occurs. And then that becomes our ceiling. So typically our dose is going to be in the range of 0.3 to 0.6 milligrams per kilogram per hour, except for that one patient in whom we had to go to 1.
The jury, I think, has heard the term anesthetic dose of ketamine. What is that?
In anesthetic, ketamine, you have to realize, is a drug that has traditionally, conventionally been used as a general anesthetic. You can put somebody to sleep and operate on them with ketamine. The dose that is necessary is a starting dose of about 1 to 2 milligrams per kilogram given intravenously. So that would be about 27 milligrams to 50 milligrams in somebody the size that Maya was back then. In an adult, it would be 70, 100, 150 maybe milligrams. And then about 3 milligrams per kilo per hour will keep them asleep in order to do an operation. So you can take somebody's appendix out at 3 milligrams per kilogram per hour.
Okay. Now, how does that compare with the dosages that were used in this case by Doctors Kirkpatrick and Hanna?
Objection.
Actions overruled.
Do you remember the question?
How does it compare to the doses that Kirkpatrick and Hanna used?
Yes, sir. Please,
Kirkpatrick started around, I think, 1 milligram per kilogram per hour, and over 4 days ramped it up to 2.5 milligrams per kilogram per hour. I don't remember what Hanna's starting dose was, but it was significantly, substantially higher, and went up even higher and higher still, so that by October of 2016, he was using doses in the range of 25 to 30 milligrams per kilogram per hour, 10 times the typical anesthetic dose for a patient.
Okay. Going back, well, let me ask you to focus on the period of time between September 23rd, 2015, when the patient first saw Dr. Kirkpatrick, and the time that she came to All Children's Hospital. Can you describe the course of her therapy and disease during that year?
Yeah, I the course that she demonstrated was one of perpetual reports of severe, intolerable pain, weakness, inability to use her limbs, inability to bring her ankle back to a neutral, normal position where the foot is about 90 degrees to the foreleg, and a behavior that was often described as a screaming type of behavior, which was attributed by her mother, and her doctors to severe pain, and that there was an undulating course, and that there were episodes in which, or time periods in which her pain seemed to be less, and then severe pain again, and then less, and then severe pain. But overall, if you look at the entire landscape from September of 2015 or summer of 2015 until the fall of 2016, you'd have to say that she was no better, in fact, getting a lot worse.
Was there any difference in function as far as the patient was concerned during those 2 dates, as far as you could determine?
When her function was much worse by the time October 2016 came around and she was admitted to All Children's Hospital, she said that she could not move her limbs, she could not lift them against gravity off the bed. She had significant pain, so that she would be screaming in pain, would not tolerate anybody touching her. Her mother would not allow anybody to touch her because of the pain that would occur.
Going back, if we could, to the point of Dr. Kirkpatrick's initial involvement in September of 2015 and the therapy that he offered, do you have an opinion that you can state within a reasonable degree of medical probability whether the treatment he offered was within the standard of care for the treatment of pediatric complex regional pain syndrome in this country?
It was not within the standard of care.
And why is that?
As I said earlier, ketamine is reserved in our institution nationwide for patients whose pain is refractory and unresponsive to the fundamental treatment, which is, as I said and will repeat, intensive physical therapy, advancing to intensive physical therapy if necessary, occupational therapy, psychotherapy, drug management as an outpatient, oral drug management. His first treatment was ketamine. So it was, at the very least, it was very, very premature. In addition, the way that he administered ketamine, which was in significant doses, was a violation of the standard of care in terms of his record keeping. There are specific not recommendations or guidelines, there are specific ways that records need to be kept during anesthetic type infusion as he administered to Maya. And remember that going up to 2.5 milligrams per kilogram is virtually a gentle anesthetic. His record keeping was just terrible. It was skeletal, minimal at best in terms of measuring vital signs and recording level of consciousness. That is to say, it violated the standard of care for an anesthesiologist.
Was there any harm to Maya Kowalski as a result of this?
There was no harm to Maya in terms of specifically receiving the ketamine. Fortunately, she didn't have any complications from it, and not surprisingly, her pain reports were diminished after ketamine, because ketamine is not only just a great analgesic, it also has psychiatric effects, which you may be aware of. You may know that ketamine is being used more and more frequently by psychiatrists to treat depression and anxiety, which isn't to say that that's what she had, but only to say that there are emotional/psychiatric effects of ketamine. So in that sense, she was no worse. But I would say the harm that was done was that instead of being referred to a center that knows how to take care of pediatric CRPS, he went ahead and administered ketamine, and then when that really didn't work, it didn't provide sustained benefit, he referred her to Mexico. And that's another story that you'll probably get into, I suppose, with your questioning. But I think the important damage that was done was in denying Maya effective therapy for CRPS, and we're assuming this is what she had, at that time, because if she had CRPS and if she had effective therapy for it at her age, I would have expected her to improve and recover in a matter of weeks, and that wasn't done.
Okay. And that's something I hadn't asked you before I go to Dr. Cantu. Was there an adequate trial of alternative therapy before the ketamine was given?
There was not.
And if there had been, if you compare what might have been, so to speak, if the program pursued was similar to your clinic, what is the outcome that is expected or anticipated for a child such as this receiving standard of care therapy?
Maya, I think, was about 10 years old at the time, and I would say that 10-year-old girls, and I say girls because it's about 7 or 8 times more common in females than in males. So almost all of our patients are females who have CRPS. And we don't know why that is. But 10-year-old girls with CRPS are our favorite population to take care of with CRPS. Why? Because they're the easiest to take care of, they recover the fastest, and they don't recur. Of all the kids we've taken care of, we've never had a recurrence of CRPS in a child whom we've treated at the age of 10 or 11 or 12. As kids get older, it becomes more difficult to treat, more challenging, and as children advance through adolescence, their teen years into their young adult years, it begins more and more to take on the pattern of adult CRPS, which is a much more difficult condition to treat.
Let's talk about Dr. Cantu's treatment. Can you describe for the jury your perception of what it consisted of?
His was called ketamine coma. It was coma in the sense that a patient on the kind of doses that Cantu uses is going to be unresponsive, unconscious. In other words, under general anesthesia. So it's not really coma, but he's giving general anesthetic doses. So the patient is under general anesthesia for the 5 days of his infusion, which starts at 3 milligrams per kilogram per hour and advances day by day to a higher dose. I think the highest dose that Maya received was 5 milligrams per kilogram per hour, maybe 6. Those doses result in complete general anesthesia, or coma, which I don't think is a correct term to use in that instance. For that reason, Dr. Cantu has to treat the patient as if they're under a general anesthetic, which is what we do in the operating room, except that he's doing it in an intensive care unit, which is a good environment for that. The patient is intubated, that is, they have a breathing tube placed into their mouth, down their windpipe. It's attached to a mechanical ventilator to breathe for the patient because they won't breathe adequately on their own. They have to place a tube in the stomach, either to decompress it or to provide nutrition, which was done in Maya's case. So they are basically under a prolonged general anesthetic for 5 days.
Is there, is that treatment, in your experience and based on your background and training, within the standard of care for an anesthesiologist providing care for pediatric complex regional pain syndrome in the United States?
It is not. It is not within the standard of care, and that's why it's not done anywhere in the United States.
Let's move on. Did it appear to you, based on the review of the records that you saw and the depositions you reviewed, did it appear that the treatment rendered by Dr. Cantu in Mexico was successful in any sense of the word?
It wasn't successful in the sense that any benefit that she realized was not sustained over a significant period of time. So within 4 or 5 or 6 weeks, she was reporting an increase in pain. And that's in contrast to the patients that we have experience with and other places have experience with in the United States with low-dose ketamine, low dose being 1/10 the amount that Dr. Cantu used, in which the benefit in CRPS is sustained over several months.
Now let's talk about the care that, well, let me back up. After seeing Dr. Cantu, this patient was seen by Dr. Hannah, correct?
Correct.
And describe for the jury what Dr. Hanna's course of treatment consisted of.
Dr. Hanna saw Maya from December of 2015, about a month and a half after she returned from Mexico, until he sent her to All Children's Hospital October the 7th of 2016, so over a period of nearly a year. His treatment involved giving Hannah infusions of ketamine over several days each time, over 4 days each time, in ever-increasing doses. So he started off using doses similar to what Dr. Cantu finished with, and because she kept coming back over and over and over again with increasing complaints of pain and no improvement, according to his notes, she continued to have dystonia of her feet, allodynia, which is this exquisite pain with light touch of the skin, etc. He kept giving her higher and higher and higher doses.
How did that finish? How did Dr. Hanna's treatment finish in October of 2016?
Because of the excessive doses of ketamine, she was losing weight. She had lost appetite. Her weight had fallen. She was not on her growth curve. Not only had she stopped gaining weight as children do as they grow, she had started losing weight. She was at the first percentile, which means that 99% of children of her age weighed more than she did. And she had terrible abdominal pain. And that was one reason that he sent her to the emergency room at All Children's, was because of the abdominal pain. And she had had some episodes of abdominal pain associated with these high doses of ketamine prior to that time. So it was something that had been getting worse and worse.
Was Dr. Hanna's therapy of Maya Kowalski successful?
It was not, in the sense that it was necessary to send her to All Children's Hospital. I think at that point in October, he could not bring himself to give her more ketamine. He knew that the ketamine dose that he was giving was so high, he just couldn't imagine giving more. And at that point, he bailed out and sent her to All Children's Hospital.
Did Dr. Hanna's care and treatment of Maya Kowalski comply with the standard of care for an anesthesiologist treating complex regional pain syndrome in the pediatric setting in this country?
Objection. Foundation, predicate, beyond scope, all disclosure.
Overruled.
Again, it did not. And it did not because of several factors. The one most glaring factor is the dose of ketamine that he was using and the way he was using it. And during the infusions, as was the case with Dr. Kirkpatrick, she was inadequately monitored and there was inadequate recording of the safety of this, vital signs, etc. He was giving anesthetic doses and yet was not recording things as an anesthesiologist should, documenting safety.
Was there injury or harm to Maya Kowalski as a result of the course of therapy that Dr. Hanna pursued?
No objection.
Overruled.
And I would add that
Foundation, predicate.
I would ask that within a reasonable degree of medical probability.
There was harm. The harm was, as I said, that she was developing complications, weight loss, loss of appetite, etc. from the ketamine therapy. At least I think it was from the ketamine therapy. There was no other obvious or possible cause for that, except the high-dose ketamine. She had no other reason to be losing weight. And also because, as was the case with Dr. Kirkpatrick, he denied her the opportunity for effective therapy for CRPS, if that's indeed what she had.
Okay. Now, let's shift gears, if we can, to the patient's admission to Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital on or about October 7th of 2016. Have you reviewed the entire record of that hospitalization?
Yes, I have.
Do you have an opinion that you can express to us within a reasonable degree of medical probability with respect to whether the care that was rendered to Maya Kowalski during that admission complied with the standard of care for hospitals and physicians taking care of pediatric complex regional pain syndrome in the United States.
Overbroad, beyond scope, foundation, predicate, includes all.
Overruled.
Yes, I do have an opinion, and my opinion is that they did comply with the standard of care.
Would you explain the basis for your opinion, if you would, please, sir?
Well, there was so much done. There were so many things that were done for Maya in the hospital that I have to address some of them individually. First of all, she came to the emergency room with a complaint of abdominal pain. The emergency room physician noticed immediately that her symptoms did not correspond to her physical examination, so there was a big discrepancy there. And of course, she came with a history of getting these huge infusions of ketamine, with which they had no experience. I've never heard of infusions of ketamine that high. And they realized that some of the symptoms that she may be manifesting were a complication of that ketamine therapy in some way or another, and it was necessary to hospitalize her. If for no other reason to effectively treat the pain that she was reporting, but also to deal with this enormous dose of ketamine, what they were going to do with it, and to treat the pain and disability that she was manifesting. In the intensive care unit, they needed to put her back on a ketamine infusion. You might wonder why they were doing that when I said it wasn't an effective therapy for her, and that's because she had become physically dependent and tolerant of ketamine. The fact that she could still be awake on 13 milligrams per kilogram per hour of ketamine tells you that she had become incredibly tolerant, to become unresponsive to the ketamine, which was, I suppose, the basis for Dr. Hanna to keep ramping up the dose, which is a violation of the rule of what I call the rule of holes, which is when you're in a hole, stop digging. He kept digging deeper and deeper and deeper, and making her more and more and more and more dependent, physically dependent on ketamine. A common term for that would be addiction, but it's not really quite what I would call an addiction, but certainly major physical dependency and tolerance. So they needed to put her in an intensive care unit to take her down from ketamine in a controlled fashion, to wean her from ketamine, to prevent overt ketamine withdrawal, which would have been a very unpleasant thing for her. At that point, they still needed to keep her in the hospital. Her evaluation wasn't complete. And that also, while she was in the intensive care unit, they began to develop concern for the fact that Beata, her mother, was saying that she was going to take her out of the hospital and take her back to Dr. Hanna.
Approach on this one. Members of the jury, you're going to disregard the last comment that the witness made. Mr. Hunter, you may continue.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. Let me ask you some specific questions about this, if I could, Doctor. First of all, was it reasonable for the physicians and staff at Johns Hopkins All Children's to attempt to wean Maya off of the medications that she had been getting?
Yes, it was.
And tell us why that would be.
As I said, she had come from Dr. Hanna's office after an infusion of a very high dose of ketamine. She was physically dependent on it by history, and it was necessary to wean her from ketamine in a controlled fashion over days to prevent her from having withdrawal symptoms.
Was it reasonable? Well, let me ask you this. Was it reasonable for them to attempt to transfer this patient to a facility more able to deal with her complex regional pain syndrome?
That wouldn't have been the priority at that point in time. But ultimately, it would have been appropriate to transfer her to a center that knew how to take care of complex regional pain syndrome in children.
Okay. And the priority at that point in time would have been to do the weaning and
Correct.
take care of the acute problem.
Yes.
As the treatment at Johns Hopkins All Children's proceeded, was it reasonable for them to attempt to treat, well, strike that, let me back up. What would have been the appropriate treatment of this child at that time at Johns Hopkins All Children's or at any other institution that was similarly situated?
You can't treat without a diagnosis. It was, I think, clear to them after the pain management consultation that she didn't have complex regional pain syndrome. They needed to determine exactly what was causing the problems that were causing her symptoms.
What were the other possibilities that might be considered in the diagnosis on this patient at that time?
The important thing to realize is that the symptoms that Maya and her mother...
Ground scope qualifications if you're doing psychological.
Approach. Objection sustained.
Let me just ask a question this way, Doctor. You saw, well, did you see in the records that there had been that the initial diagnosis upon admission was complex regional pain syndrome?
I don't know if you're referring to the note from the pediatric intensive care unit resident, which it didn't exactly say that. It was number 1. I think it said something like CRPS diagnosed by outside person or institution.
By history.
Something like that, right? That's not the same as saying she has CRPS.
Okay. Do you have it? And as time went on, that diagnosis by history remained in the chart, correct?
Yes, it did.
Okay. Do you have an opinion with respect to whether this child had, at that time or even today, complex regional pain syndrome?
Today I can't answer, of course, because I haven't seen Maya. Haven't read any very recent reports of how she's doing. But I didn't see.
Can you get a little bit closer to the microphone?
Yes, I'm sorry. I said I can't comment on today, but I didn't see anything consistent with the diagnosis of CRPS, except the report of pain, as just pain, but because there's a lot of things that cause pain, of course, but including CRPS. But I didn't see anything to suggest to me that she had CRPS at any point in her history.
Do you have any opinion regarding what her diagnosis was during the time she was at Johns Hopkins Old Children's Hospital?
Sustained as phrased.
What were the alternative diagnoses that a physician such as yourself?
Hold on a second.
Doctor, let's talk about the chronic regional pain opinion you just expressed. Why do you say that there was not a diagnosis, why do you say that CRPS was not the diagnosis at this time?
Number of
By
reasons.
this time, I mean at the time of admission and during admission.
Well, looking at her history, she...
That one's allowed.
Shall I continue?
Yes, go ahead.
Well, looking at her history, she didn't present as a patient with CRPS, and she didn't meet the usual criteria that we use for diagnosing CRPS.
Okay, would you explain that, please?
There was a meeting that was held in Budapest in the late 1990s, I think. It was a meeting of the Neuropathic Pain Interest Group of the International Association for the Study of Pain, and they established specific criteria for the diagnosis, to make the diagnosis of CRPS. And she did not meet those criteria.
In what respect?
The criteria include features on a physical examination, which are differences in the temperature of the affected limb to other limbs. It's cold. It's generally colder. Color changes, generally speaking, blue-purple color. In the very earliest phases of CRPS, it can be red, overperfused, but generally speaking, the limb is cold and blue or purple. There are secondary changes to the skin and hair growth, and there are motor abnormalities, such as tremors or dystonia. And the most important one of the most important diagnostic criteria, and the final one, is they list criteria for symptoms reported by the patient, A, B, C, and D, and then physical examination features that are seen by a physician, A, B, C, and D. And the final diagnostic criteria is these things cannot be explained by another diagnosis. And that's important. So if there's another diagnosis that can explain the cluster of symptoms and signs, then it's not CRPS.
During the period of time between September of 2015 and the patient's admission to All Children's in October of 2016, was there ever any definitive effort to rule out, that you could tell from the records, to rule out other diagnoses as a cause for her symptoms and her presentation?
Yeah, to the extent it strays into the area.
You can answer that right now.
She had been seen with this cluster of symptoms at Tampa General Hospital, at Lurie Children's Hospital in Chicago, and Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital in Tampa.
You're referring to 2015?
Yeah, in 2015. Each of those institutions, independently of each other, said that it was not CRPS and noted that there were very significant discrepancies between the symptoms that she was reporting and their physical examination findings. So coming to a diagnosis when faced with that is a slow process that requires a long period of observation in order to decide exactly what's going on. But we know that there was no organic reason for what was happening at any of those points in time. And it wasn't CRPS. But actually nailing down the diagnosis, it takes time and lots of observation and lots of hypotheses.
During that period, from September of 2015 to October of 2016, did the records and materials that you reviewed indicate any effort on the part of Drs. Hanna or Cantu or Kirkpatrick to reconcile their diagnosis of CRPS with the diagnoses that were either made or suspected by the physicians at Lurie Children's and Tampa General and All Children's?
Neither Kirkpatrick nor Hanna reviewed the records from Tampa General and Lurie Children's Hospital, as far as we can tell. They certainly didn't make any note of it in their records. If they had, I think they might have begun to question their diagnosis of CRPS, because what was obvious in those records is that there was something else going on. And to answer your question, no, they didn't pursue any other diagnostic ideas or anything to chase those ideas down.
During the period of her admission to Johns Hopkins All Children's, did it appear to you that there was any change or improvement in the child's condition?
I think there was, actually, between October and January when she was discharged.
In what respect?
Well, first, certainly her symptoms didn't get any worse, and yet her drug therapy was pruned down from something like 18 medications that she was taking on admission down to a much smaller number. I can't remember exactly what. And that process continued after discharge, of slowly dropping off medications that she was taking. She was more functional on discharge than she was on admission. She was able to propel her wheelchair a number of feet. She was able to support her weight standing with assistance. And there were lots of observations in which she was able to do things with her arms, such as reaching for things, that she said that she couldn't do, but she was doing by the time of discharge.
Did you see any evidence or suggestion that her stay at All Children's Hospital either caused any aggravation of her condition or caused any injury to her?
No, I did not.
Let me ask you, I'm going to show a couple of pictures here. The jury has heard a lot of discussion, and we've had a lot of discussion about let me back up here and let me ask to show Exhibit 3135-2 in evidence.
Last four.
3135-2. This is a picture of Maya Kowalski, we believe, taken January 1st of 2017. What is the mark on her forehead?
It's a scratch.
Objection and speculation.
Overruled.
It's a scratch.
What are CRPS lesions, doctor?
There really isn't such a thing as CRPS lesions. There are skin problems that occur with CRPS. The thing is that when there's a skin injury, the lesion or the injury can become larger. It can even form an ulcer because the perfusion, the blood flow to the skin of CRPS is so poor. So nutrients and oxygen are not arriving at the part of the skin that's been damaged, and so it doesn't heal. It just gets worse and worse and worse. So you see small ulcerations, you see very, very large ulcerations, and then there are other, I wouldn't call them lesions, but the appearance of the skin can be very abnormal in CRPS. Very, very swollen. There can be color changes, as I said, deep purple skin. There can be blood vessel. It's hard to describe, almost like purple stripes on the skin. It can be mottled, but those aren't really lesions. So the lesions that occur because of poor blood flow to the skin, and something injures the skin and it just festers and grows from there. You can see from this picture that, well, a couple of things. First, CRPS does not occur on the face. CRPS type 1, which is what we're talking about, does not occur on the face or the forehead. Number 2, you can see it's nice and pink, it's well perfused, it's got good blood flow. And number 3, it's a linear lesion. It's a fingernail scratch, I would say. I would speculate, but it's a scratch nevertheless. It's not a CRPS lesion.
Let me ask that we put up Defense Exhibit 3232-962 in evidence. And for the record, this is, we understand it's dated December 6th of 2014. Now, in this picture, Doctor, this is before the disease, whatever it was, began. How is this picture significant in retrospect?
Well, here we see a cute little girl smiling, sitting on Santa's lap. She's happy. Obviously, there's not much wrong going on. What I noticed in this picture were the position of her feet. So you see the left foot, she's holding it up. It's at 90 degrees. That's a pretty normal posture. But if you're sitting on somebody's lap or if you're being held up in the air, the feet sort of drop down if you don't pick them up. So her right foot, the foot is sort of dropped down with gravity, and the left foot is normal. But she has to flex her calf muscles to make the left foot go up like that. So the point of this picture is that the very fact that a foot is pointed down like that is not an abnormality.
Okay. Let me ask that we put up 3232-0810. In evidence. And for the record, this is, we understand, dated July 30th, 2015.
I don't think we have the right exhibit.
3232-0810. There you go. Now, what is the significance of this picture taken shortly before admission to Lurie Children's Hospital?
Can we get a date on the photograph?
So that's what I've got is 7/30/15.
Thank you.
I think this picture was taken in Chicago. She's being held by a man. The man's hands are on her left thigh and her buttock. Remember, she could not tolerate the touch of anything on her skin when she was in the emergency room and then in the hospital at Lurie Children's Hospital. She would scream and would not allow anything to touch her skin. But here you see a man holding her, and obviously not only touching her skin, you can see actually the tips of his fingers are indenting the skin a little bit, especially his left hand. And yet she's smiling and happy. And you can see again that her feet are pointed down a little bit, but not very much because they're going down with gravity. And she's wearing socks, and she couldn't tolerate wearing socks or anything on her feet by history at that point in time. But here she is in socks and with somebody touching her skin this way. And of course her arms, which could not be touched even lightly, are touching his shirt and his shoulder, and her torso is touching his body. And none of that seems to be bothering her. She seems to be very happy here.
Okay. Could I ask that we put up 3232-439? And this picture, we understand, is dated July 6th, 2016. What is significant about this picture from your clinical standpoint, Doctor?
July 6, 2016. I'm trying to think of what was going on in her life at that time. 2016. So this was during Hannah's treatment and a couple of months before going to All Children's Hospital. So you see Hannah is in a wheelchair. She's holding her left arm up against gravity. It's not resting upon anything while she's holding her balloons. She's happy. And her feet are both, well, her right foot anyway, is at 90 degrees. It's at a normal position, even though at that point in time, according to Hannah's notes, she had dystonia of both her feet, and then she could not bring them back to a normal position. She had them fixed in a pointed position. We also see that looks like her foot is, her feet are touching the footrest. It's hard to tell, but anyway, that's what I observed from this picture.
Okay. And could we then put up Defense Exhibit 3232-354? And that's dated 28 August 2016, August 28, 2016.
Okay, once again, Hannah is in a period of time when she's being treated by...
Maya? I'm sorry.
Maya is being treated by Dr. Hannah, and he's increasing the dose of ketamine higher and higher and higher because every time she comes in the office, he's recording that she's in terrible pain, 9 out of 10 pain, she's got dystonia of her feet, etc. But here we see that she's sitting in a wheelchair, she's happy, she doesn't give the appearance of a child in 9 out of 10 pain, and she has her knees folded, and she's sitting on her feet, and her legs are in contact with each other. You know, the calves are pushing up against the thighs. And again, I would have suspected that that would not be possible for a child with CRPS. That would be too painful.
Now, let me ask, we put up 3232-0345. And this is, we understand, taken August 31st, 2016. What is significant about this photo, Doctor?
Again, this is a time period at which Hannah is treating her, and the dose is still going up higher and higher. So here we see, again, her right arm is being held against gravity. It's not resting on the armrest. And she seems to be comfortable. And her feet are in a perfectly normal position, 90 degrees, flat-footed on the ground. At a time at which, again, Hannah is recording, presumably because Hannah is being told that her feet are in a fixed dystonic position and she cannot bring them back to 90 degrees.
Okay. And then finally, let me ask you to let us put up 3232-365, which we understand was taken August 18th, 2016. Can you tell us about this picture?
August
16th, 2016.
Okay, again, during Hannah's treatment, this is presumably during one of his treatments. We can see EKG stickers on her chest, a blood pressure cuff on her arm, an IV tubing. You can't tell exactly where the IV is connected to, but there's IV tubing on top of the teddy bear. And she's unconscious. Her mouth is just slack, open, and she's breathing on her own. Presumably, she's pink, and she's not conscious. She's not responsive. So this is presumably during a ketamine infusion, again showing that she's more than sedated.
When you say more than sedated, what do you mean?
Well, it's hard to say exactly. Sedation is a continuum from being awake to having your anxiety eliminated, to being lightly sedated, to being deeply sedated. Deeply sedated means she has the appearance of a deeply sedated patient, meaning that she would not respond to voice. But it's hard to tell exactly. But she doesn't look like she would.
You've expressed a number of opinions here today, Doctor. Have you expressed those opinions within a reasonable degree of medical probability?
Yes, I have.
I have just a moment, Your Honor.
You may.
Doctor, have you seen records regarding this patient from after her discharge at All Children's Hospital?
I've seen Dr. Wassenauer, is that his name pronounced correctly? Her pediatrician. I've seen his records following her admission.
Do you have an impression of how she did following discharge from All Children?
Back up. What was your question just prior to that?
Overruled on that one.
I'm sorry.
You asked if I had seen records from Hannah, from Maya after her discharge?
Yes, yes, sir.
Yeah, I saw Wassenauer's records.
You can continue.
And it seemed like she was doing exceptionally well.
Okay. Did it appear to you that she had recovered function in that period of time after discharge?
Yes, she was in high school. She was in athletics. Was doing quite well.
Recognizing that your frame of reference may not extend all the way to the present day, and that you've never examined this patient, do you have any opinion that you can express within reasonable medical probability regarding what future needs she may have?
Well, I don't think she had CRPS to begin with, so I won't comment on if she did have CRPS, what her future needs would be. But I would say, from what I know, I don't see that she would have any particular needs at all, except for support from a mental health professional.
That's all I have. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Plaintiffs.
Let me see the attorneys for timing, please. You know, it was just a big discussion about when we're going to do lunch. and it probably is better that we go to lunch now as opposed to finishing the witness. So, let me see here. Let's have you back, ready to go. 1:10. Do not discuss this case amongst yourselves. Do not do any investigation and receive no information.
All rise. Jurors exited.
Presence. Doctor, since you're in the middle of your testimony, you can't talk to anyone about your testimony, okay?
Okay.
And if you want to go to lunch now, that's fine, and just be back here. Once you be back here by 1.
Judge, can I inquire about since he's our expert, is that still holding?
So you're not objecting?
To what?
She wants to be able to talk to him during.
Since he's our expert as opposed to a regular
No, he's in the middle of testimony.
Yeah. So yeah, let's not have that discussion.
Understood.
And is today the day that you're going to have a witness with the diagnosis of Munchausen?
Yes, it is. And if you want to talk about how
We're going to need to talk about that.
I agree.
Okay.
I'd love some guidance.
Sir, you can take off.
All right.
Do you want to talk about that now, or do you want to go to lunch and then come back and talk about it right after lunch?
Well, I wouldn't mind a little bit of guidance just because the witness is going to be here over this.
Okay, then everyone can sit down.
Some guidance about what I mean about talking about Munchausen.
Sure.
So the witness after Dr. Crane will be Dr. Paula Dees. She's a pediatric hospitalist who saw the patient over 2 one-week periods, I believe, roughly starting October 18th for about a week and then again on October 31st for about a week. Her notes are significant that in her initial impression and plan, she does have as one of her impressions Munchausen by proxy, or I think it's her exact words are concerns for Munchausen by proxy. And then there's obviously discussions in some of her progress notes about DCF. You know, one particular one, Mr. Kowalski is asking, or Maya's asking to visit with her father, and she says she contacted the Child Protective Investigation CPI to help coordinate that visit. I don't know that that's as much of a concern since I'm not going to dwell on it, but I'd appreciate the court's guidance in terms of what you want me to do there, and specifically whether they're going to cross her on that.
Well, I'm sorry. So I thought you were having a expert
My
come
apologies.
in.
No. Our expert that would have qualifications to touch on Munchausen's would be Dr. Alexander, and he's not coming until, I believe, Monday or Tuesday next week. So this is just a hospitalist with that concern for Munchausen as one of her diagnoses in her record.
Well, let me, because I meant to say this yesterday and then again this morning, but I am, this is kind of where I'm at right this second. Whether Beata Kowalski.
I'm sorry, Judge. I'm stopping you only to throw this out because I've got Sally Smith coming in 2 days. So if you can give us the benefit of your wisdom on both these points, it would be helpful.
In my view, whether Beata Kowalski in fact suffered or had Munchausen by proxy, I don't see how that is material to any cause of action or issue that is remaining in this case. So I'm not sure why we need to be trying to prove the diagnosis. Now, the observations of the hospital, its doctors, that, as Maya was brought in and what the situation that the hospital faced with Maya coming into the hospital, I do think it's relevant to help explain how and why the hospital made the decisions that it did. So, that's why I've been letting in, the Lurie, all of these prior hospital visits. But when we get to, I'm not sure we need a witness to come in and testify that mom had Munchausen by proxy. I don't see what we're asking the jury to decide in this case, as opposed to what would have been the Chapter 39 case. So that's kind of where I'm at. Now, your specific question about Dr. Dees, she's a hospitalist. I think she was a hospitalist.
Yes, Your Honor.
And so, her observations, I think, are fine. And I'm assuming those records are in evidence that you were referring to.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, again, the gravity associated with the Chapter 39 proceeding tends to pull everything. But let's avoid the temptation to be pulled by the gravity to walk down the Chapter 39 issues.
Yeah, and so just for some clarification, one of the issues in the case that the plaintiffs have been attacking, so I'll just cut to the chase. On the transfer forms to Nemours in late October, November, not the first one before the shelter order, but later, the Nemours documentation says, I don't know if it's exactly diagnosis, but they have diagnosis codes for several conditions. One of them is Munchausen's, and it says, quote, assigned by Dr. Dees. The plaintiff in this case has made a central issue that the reason why the Kowalskis would not agree to the transfer is because they didn't agree with the transfer codes. So I would appreciate some guidance either from the court or from the plaintiff. Do they plan on trying to cross-examine her? I feel like she would need a chance to explain some part of this if they're going to cross-examine her and make an issue to the jury that she had no right to list that as a concern, and that her thoughts on this were the reasons for blocking the diagnosis. It starts to make that, in her words, a concern, in blocking transfer of material issue in the case.
Well, I suggest that the witness stay away from the transfer issue to avoid this. The fact is that there were no doctors qualified in any way, shape, or form at the time of the Nemours or before at Johns Hopkins that diagnosed Munchausen by proxy. It came from a nurse, Ashley Sumner, and to a certain extent, I think Dr. Malik, the record reflects. And so, to the extent that they presented this to Beata and Jack Kowalski with diagnostic codes for psychological issues, then that is relevant material to their decision not to sign the transfer. But I prefer not to get into the Munchausen part of it.
Because there were two transfers. What time are we talking about?
Yeah, I think the actual time of the Nemours record for transfer is November 2nd.
The one with the
But at that point, that's in Chapter 39 time frame, and that was an issue that was being discussed in the dependency court, right?
Yes.
Right. November 2nd, there's transfer efforts were availing for some period of time. The initial transfer effort, the one that we heard about this morning.
The one in October.
Correct. Yes, sir. That one is 39 neutral. There was no petition. There was no order.
Can I just stop you there? But is that the one that Dr. Dees is going to be talking about?
Yes, and to your point.
And not the November one?
Correct. She was not, no, the other way around. She was not involved at all until October 18th. She had no involvement in the first one prior to the shelter. Her only involvement was trying to get as one of the members of the medical team, trying to get the kid transferred to Nemours after the period of shelter, and the plaintiff has attacked Dr. D's and All Children's for including or having some influence on the diagnoses codes being Munchausen by proxy as the reason why they would not sign on to transfer.
Well, on that particular issue, I go back to whether you prove that mom had Munchausen or not. It doesn't go to Beata's state of mind as to why she wasn't going to sign it.
Right, but I believe.
I mean, one, it seems like that specific time frame is when the dependency court was involved in addressing this particular issue. And so I'm not seeing how we really need to walk this path with the November transfer attempt.
Let me try to articulate this in 30 seconds just to give you my frame of mind. The concern from the defense on a more overall basis is from opening argument and at various points in the trial, the plaintiff has injected into this litigation, right or wrong, and sometimes over the judicial instruction, that the only way Maya could be freed from All Children's was for this sort of altruistic suicide, right? And I know that obviously goes to some of the elements of intentional infliction, and they're arguing directly in opening that because we accused Beata Kowalski of this Munchausen's diagnosis, so we believe it's material for that. And it's also one of the defenses to their themes of the only way to free Maya was this altruistic suicide, is that we were actually trying to actively transfer her throughout this whole time, to which the plaintiff's response is, yes, but only with this erroneous diagnosis code, which they would never agree to. So while I completely understand the court's point that in general, whether Munchausen or not Munchausen isn't directly central to any themes, the plaintiff has made an argument, and my fear on the defense side is they're going to stand up in closing argument and say, we couldn't get Maya out of there because they made this diagnosis of Munchausen with no basis, and we're afraid we're going to hear it in closing.
Well, I mean, you probably saw the instruction that we were discussing this morning where I'm specifically saying, and I think I had took the language of Mr. Altenburn about how the hospital's not responsible for the length of the stay of Maya in Johns Hopkins because only the dependency court controlled that issue. So when we talk about a transfer that is during the dependency action as opposed to the attempted transfer when there was no shelter petition filed and no dependency court involvement, and we have the prospect of a false imprisonment, I see those as materially distinct issues. And so how do we get to discussing that specific transfer attempt in November without getting into what was going on in the dependency court? That's that gravity of the Chapter 39 issue that I'm trying to keep us from going into this black hole.
I'm completely sympathetic to this court's position on that, and you're absolutely right. That is an issue that bleeds together, if not has a gravitational pull. Again, this may be an issue for a jury instruction where we are going to likely request an instruction that the plaintiffs are not seeking damage from the defendants for any allegation of Munchausen, that the plaintiffs are not going to suggest to this jury that some allegation of Munchausen caused or contributed to damage. But I guess we can deal with that. But I guess for the very short purpose of this witness, what I think I'm understanding from this court is, while they're certainly going to see that in her record, and we can touch briefly on the fact that that was part of her impression, that I will not have this witness focus on the Munchausens, although, again, I'm somewhat concerned that they're going to get into, with this witness, you worked with, you consulted with Sally Smith, and then they're going to blow the door open to this, right? So
Well, Mr. Whitney, Ms. Lawrence, and Mr. Anderson are hearing this discussion, and all I would say is if somebody feels they're going to be asking a question that might draw us into that vortex that is Chapter 39, and we can't escape the pull of the black hole that is Chapter 39, come talk to me ahead of time before we ask the question.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Now, Mr. Hunter talked about Sally Smith. That's probably a longer discussion than a couple minutes before we run to lunch. But as a 30,000-foot view, it seems to me that you can talk, and Dr. Sally Smith can, generally say what she was doing, not that what her specific diagnosis or recommendations were, but she came in, she's talked to people and whatnot. She was on staff, that she also had this second hat, which is with the Suncoast and whatever her outfit is and her contracts, but very generally about that, but not into the specifics as to what her recommendations were. And I think you also are able to talk about saying, hey, the plaintiffs are saying that you were on staff and that you were treating her. These are some examples of what the plaintiff was saying that you were treating her with, and then getting her to say whatever she's going to say about that. But I don't want to get into a really lengthy discussion about the 14,000 things she did or didn't do as an investigator in the Chapter 39 proceeding. Does that help any?
I think so. The big question is, I guess, and I think I just heard the answer, that you don't want me walking her through her report.
No, we're not walking through the report. I mean, I've kept that out.
I kind of saw where that was going. Okay, very well, Your Honor. Let me mull that over, and I may ask for further guidance.
But I believe, since the plaintiffs have put into play the concept that Sally Smith went over her line of demarcation as an investigator and was treating Maya, you are able to defend the allegations that she was treating Maya.
Yep.
I mean, I think that is fair, and you're allowed to defend that against that allegation.
Okay, thank you, Judge.
All right.
So if we were back at 1 o'clock with 10 minutes before the jury comes back, is that enough time? That gives us an hour and 5 minutes before we'll be back.
That's fine, Judge. 1 o'clock.
1 o'clock it is. Or Mr. Anderson, did you have something?
Yes, I had provided a summary of the ketamine infusions that we've all actually been using, originally derived, amazingly enough, from Sally Smith's notes as to the different infusion schedules of Dr. Kirkpatrick, Dr. Cantu, and Dr. Hanna. And we went back, double-checked it, submitted it. What I want to know now is there going to be an objection about the infusion schedules, or do I have to go back and go through every single one of these?
Why don't you and the defense talk about this issue offline, and then if there's a problem with it, then we will
I'll
take it
just
up.
note that they've been using it during their questioning of witnesses. They've been referencing our demonstrative aid, so I don't know what the objection is.
I have not been using.
I didn't say you have. I didn't say you have. I said defense counsel has.
All right, we'll discuss it, Judge, over lunch as suggested.
Thank you. 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock.